Picture a typical trip to the pharmacy. You have a headache, you buy a mass-produced bottle of pills, and you just swallow a chemical compound that was cooked up in some massive vat somewhere.
Right. And you're just hoping it works for your specific biology.
Exactly. I mean, that is how medicine has worked for over a century.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to imagine a world where a cancer treatment isn't pulled from a standard shelf. Like, imagine a treatment that is custom manufactured exclusively for your body.
Yeah, like a bespoke suit.
Yeah, perfectly tailored, but designed with one relentless, hyper-specific purpose, which is to ruthlessly hunt down your exact tumor cells, and literally nothing else. Welcome back to What the Study Says. I'm Dr. Kai.
And I'm Dr. May.
As doctors and researchers, we spend our days, sifting through an endless mountain of medical data. Yeah. And frankly, there are a lot of overhyped promises in the biotech field.
Oh, absolutely. So much hype.
Right. But our mission today is to dissect something that actually lives up to the hype. We are looking at the groundbreaking phase 3 trial data that just dropped from Merck and Moderna regarding their personalized mRNA melanoma vaccine.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, this isn't some, far-off science fiction concept anymore. This is a tangible, measurable leap toward curing high-risk skin cancer.
It really is. The data we are poring over today, it truly represents a fundamental shift in oncology. We are moving away from the theoretical potential of mRNA technology and firmly into the realm of hard, undeniable clinical proof.
Right.
It is incredibly exciting to see the numbers actually validate the science.
So let's get right into those numbers and the hard data that has the entire medical community completely buzzing today.
Yeah.
We are analyzing the results of the Interpath 001 trial.
Okay.
And they looked at over 1,000 patients, like 1,137 to be exact, which is a huge number for this kind of bespoke thing.
Wow. Yeah, that is a massive cohort for a personalized treatment.
It is. And these were people who were dealing with advanced high-risk melanoma. So specifically, these were individuals with stages 2 through 4 of the disease. But a crucial detail for this trial is that all of these patients had their tumors completely surgically removed.
Right.
And none of them had received any prior systemic therapy. So they were starting with a total clean slate post-surgery.
And that clean slate is vital for understanding the results, The trial randomized these patients essentially 2-to-1. So roughly 2/3 of them received the experimental personalized vaccine along with an established immunotherapy drug called Keytruda.
Okay.
And the other third received just Keytruda alone. And they maintained this regimen for about a year.
Right.
And the results are what the industry terms statistically significant and clinically meaningful. They successfully hit their primary endpoint, which is recurrence-free survival. And they also met a key secondary endpoint, distant metastasis-free survival.
We should probably ground those terms, right? Like adjuvant therapy, recurrence-free survival, because they can sound a bit abstract if you don't spend all day in a clinic.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So think of that initial surgical resection, the physical removal of melanoma. It's like pulling a visible weed from a garden. You get down on your hands and knees, you yank out the dandelion, and the garden looks, well, completely clean to the naked eye.
Right. But we all know the frustrating reality of weeds.
Exactly. There are always these microscopic roots left behind deep in the soil.
And if you leave those microscopic roots, the dandelion is coming back, and it's usually worse than before.
Yeah.
So that is the entire concept behind adjuvant therapy. The subsequent treatment, in this case the vaccine and Keytruda combination, it acts like a highly advanced weed killer poured into the soil to stop those invisible roots from ever sprouting again.
But the brilliance here is the personalization of it all. It's not just a generic scorched earth weed killer you buy at the hardware store that might, destroy your grass and your roses too.
Right.
It's a chemical designed specifically to recognize the unique DNA of that one specific dandelion root, entirely ignoring the healthy plants right next to it.
And the timing of that intervention is just everything. The ultimate goal of adjuvant therapy is to strike early.
Yeah.
You intervene when the cancer is at its most vulnerable, before those microscopic roots have a chance to take hold and multiply and spread to distant organs.
Because once it spreads, it's a totally different ballgame.
Exactly. So by attacking early with this level of precision, we are drastically increasing the possibility of a permanent cure. And a vital piece of this puzzle is the safety profile. The trial reported no new safety signals.
Oh, that's huge.
It really is.
Yeah.
It means the side effects are consistent with what we already know about these medications. The precision doesn't come with some kind of hidden toxicity cost.
So the data proves it works better than the standard treatment. But to understand why it's so much more effective, we really have to look at what's actually inside the syringe. Like, how does this custom mRNA physically differ from what we've used in the past?
Well, it really comes down to how precisely we can communicate with the immune system. This vaccine is quite literally custom built from the ground up for each individual patient.
Okay.
So researchers take a physical sample of the patient's own surgically removed tumor and they sequence its genetics. They're hunting for its unique mutational signature,
Right.
the specific abnormalities that make it a cancer cell. In the lab, we often call this the tumor's fingerprint.
I love that term. So once they map that specific fingerprint, they build synthetic mRNA that encodes up to 34 tumor-specific neoantigens. Essentially, 34 unique biological markers that just scream, I am cancer.
Exactly.
And the logistics of the dosing schedule are pretty fascinating, too. They administer 1 milligram of this custom vaccine every 3 weeks for up to 9 doses, while the Keytruda is given on a separate track every 6 weeks for up to 9 cycles.
There is a really beautiful biological synergy in that schedule, actually.
Oh, really? How so?
Yeah. Well, when the vaccine is administered, the patient's own body acts as the manufacturing plant. The cells translate those mRNA instructions, and they present these 34 neoantigens to the immune system.
Okay.
This generates a massive, highly specific T-cell response. It's basically building an army tailored to that exact tumor fingerprint.
Wow.
Meanwhile, the Keytruda is working in the background because tumors often put the brakes on the immune system to hide, right? Keytruda essentially cuts the brake lines, while the mRNA vaccine provides the steering wheel and the map to the target.
Wait, okay, so 34 targets sounds like a lot of information to give the immune system. But cancer is notoriously tricky, right? It mutates constantly. It drops markers to evade detection.
Right, it's very evasive.
So what is stopping the tumor from just dropping a couple of those 34 markers,
Yeah.
mutating slightly, and then flying completely under the immune system's radar?
Well, the mathematical probability of the cancer pulling that off is the core brilliance of this entire design.
Okay, lay it on me.
Targeting up to 34 distinct neoantigens is analogous to locking 34 different heavy-duty doors to a bank vault. If you only lock one door, say you have a traditional targeted therapy that attacks a single protein,
Yeah.
the cancer only needs to mutate once to pick that single lock, escape, and replicate.
Oh, I see.
But if the immune system is aggressively trained to recognize 34 distinct structural abnormalities on those cells, the statistical probability of the cancer mutating fast enough to change all 34 features simultaneously without destroying itself, it's incredibly low.
Oh, wow. So you're drastically reducing the cancer's escape routes.
Yeah.
We're not just handing the immune system a grainy single mugshot of the suspect. We're giving it the suspect's fingerprints, dental records, license plate number, and home address.
That's exactly it. And because you've provided all that overlapping identifying information, those T cells become an elite, highly specialized strike force. They only care about cells exhibiting that specific combination of traits.
Which is why the healthy tissue is spared.
Precisely.
Man, seeing a mechanism that highly targeted succeed in a large clinical trial, it really feels like a paradigm shift. And not just for treating melanoma, but for the entire field of oncology.
The historical weight of this data just cannot be overstated. We are looking at the very first positive phase 3 readout for an individualized neoantigen therapy,
Wow.
and the first for an mRNA cancer therapy entirely. If you look at the reactions from the principal investigators and the folks running Merck's research labs, they aren't holding back or using cautious academic language.
No.
They're flat out calling this a landmark moment that has the potential to completely redefine how we approach melanoma treatment.
And the momentum has been building for a while. You know, if we look back at the earlier phase 2B trial data, the one known as Keynote 942, the 5-year follow-up data was just staggering.
Oh, the 5-year data was incredible.
Yeah, it showed a massive 49% reduction in the risk of recurrence and a 59% reduction in the risk of distant metastasis or death compared to patients taking Keytruda alone.
Which is just a huge jump in efficacy.
Exactly. The sheer strength of that early data is why this vaccine is now being tested in 9 ongoing phase 2 and phase 3 trials across a variety of other solid tumors. We're talking major applications in lung cancer, bladder cancer, and renal cell carcinoma.
The expansion across the oncology landscape is happening at an unprecedented pace. It's really something to watch.
But okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If that earlier phase 2b data was showing a massive 49% drop in recurrence, why did the FDA reject Moderna's push for accelerated approval back in 2024?
Right.
Like, if the data was that undeniably good, why make high-risk patients wait years for this phase 3 trial to finish?
Well, to understand the FDA's caution there, we really have to look at how medical data scales and why a larger trial is inherently messier than a small one.
Sure.
Financial analysts who monitor these biotech trials, folks from places like Citi and Jefferies, they talk a lot about the compression of the hazard ratio. This compression is entirely expected when you transition from a smaller, tightly controlled phase 2 trial to a massive, sprawling phase 3 trial.
Compression, meaning the results naturally won't look quite as dramatic when you test 1,000 people instead of just 100.
Precisely. A phase 3 study introduces a much broader, more diverse patient population. You have more complex genetics and differing health baselines.
Right.
Beyond that, there is the real-world logistical hurdle of custom manufacturing. Because it takes weeks to physically sequence a patient's tumor and build the bespoke mRNA in a lab, there is a very real possibility of the disease recurring in some patients before the custom vaccine even reaches them.
Oh, man. That's a brutal reality.
It is. So the FDA's initial rejection for accelerated approval wasn't them saying the drug didn't work. It was them telling the companies that the early math looked incredible, but they needed definitive proof that this efficacy held up against the rigorous variables of a large-scale, real-world phase 3 setting.
Basically, they needed to see if the statistical power remained strong when the sample size absolutely exploded. And that brings us to the hazard ratio. For anyone not elbow deep in medical statistics, a hazard ratio is essentially a measure of relative risk. The analysts predicted that a hazard ratio equal to or below 0.72 in this massive phase 3 trial would be considered a positive result.
Right.
And a ratio of 0.65 basically means the risk of the cancer returning drops by 35% compared to the control group. That was considered the threshold for a clear, undeniable win.
And while the companies didn't release the exact granular numerical hazard ratios in their initial press release this morning, their declaration of statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvements is the critical signal.
Yeah.
It means they have finally met that incredibly high, rigorous bar the FDA set for them. They proved it scales.
And the ripple effects of that proof are massive. Like, we are seeing absolute shockwaves triggered across the biotech and pharmaceutical industries today.
Oh, the market reaction alone paints a fascinating picture of where the business of medicine is heading right now. Seriously. Following this news, Moderna's shares just exploded. They added roughly $40 billion in market capitalization. $40 billion.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that number.
Right. They hit multi-year highs on the stock market almost instantly. And Merck stock also climbed a very healthy 11%. But looking past the immediate stock bumps, the underlying business strategy driving these two massive companies to partner up and pour billions into this specific technology is fascinating.
The corporate motivations here are just a masterclass in biotech strategy. For Merck, their reality is defined by an impending patent cliff.
Oh, the dreaded patent cliff.
Yes. They are looking down the barrel of a patent expiration for Keytruda later this decade. And Keytruda is an absolute blockbuster drug. You know, it generates tens of billions in revenue.
Wow.
When that patent expires, generic competitors will flood the market, and Merck desperately needs to diversify and protect their portfolio before that happens.
Makes total sense from a business standpoint. Right. So by pairing their star drug with a revolutionary proprietary custom vaccine, they create a new, highly effective combination therapy that essentially extends their dominance in the oncology space for decades.
It's a brilliant defensive and offensive move for Merck. And the flip side of that is Moderna, right? And for them, this represents a massive existential pivot. Moderna has openly struggled over the last few years to find a solid, reliable growth driver beyond their COVID-19 franchise.
Yeah, they had a huge boom and then had to figure out what was next.
Right. They desperately needed to prove to the world and to their investors, obviously, that their mRNA technology wasn't just a one-hit wonder uniquely suited for a global pandemic.
And the catalyst for that pivot is where medical innovation intersects with broader societal trends. If you look at the strategic moves Moderna made, their oncology chief actually noted last year that the company deliberately focused more heavily on its cancer pipeline in the wake of the Trump administration's skeptical attitude toward vaccines.
Right. And when you have massive research and development resources, but you're facing market skepticism and political headwinds regarding infectious disease vaccines, You have to look at where else your platform can work.
Exactly.
It's just a purely factual business decision.
Yeah.
You redirect that powerful mRNA tool toward oncology. That's a space where the demand for life-saving innovation is universally supported by the public, by governments, and by regulatory bodies.
It highlights how external market forces can dramatically accelerate a specific branch of medical science. Moderna had to adapt, and it seems to be paying off spectacularly across their entire pipeline.
Yeah.
Because this massive win in melanoma comes right on the heels of Moderna securing a triumphant, albeit controversial to some, recent approval for the first-ever mRNA flu vaccine. They are proving the fundamental underlying platform is incredibly versatile and robust.
We are definitely witnessing the real-time maturation of a technology that is going to define the next century of medicine. I mean, mRNA is famous globally for fighting a virus, but now we have clinical proof that it can be successfully trained to hunt down an individual's specific cancer cells.
It is amazing. To summarize the magnitude of where we stand today, the INTERPATH-001 trial is a definitive success.
Yeah.
We have a bespoke mRNA vaccine combined with the checkpoint inhibitor Keytruda, proving beyond a doubt that it can keep high-risk melanoma patients cancer-free significantly longer than the current standard of care.
Right.
By identifying 34 unique targets on a patient's tumor, it trains the immune system to attack those specific structural abnormalities, drastically reducing the cancer's ability to mutate and hide. It effectively acts as an inescapable, highly advanced weed killer for microscopic cancer cells.
It truly is the dawn of a new era in precision medicine. We are no longer hoping a generic chemical works. We are programming the body's own defense network with a hyper-specific set of instructions.
Which brings up a really provocative thought about the future.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If we zoom out and think about the trajectory of this technology over the next 10 or 20 years, the implications are staggering. Right now, we are successfully sequencing a tumor and mapping 34 targets to prevent melanoma recurrence after surgery.
Right. The cancer is already formed, it was physically removed, and we are using mRNA to clean up the invisible microscopic remnants left behind.
Exactly. But consider the preventative applications.
You mean taking it from an adjuvant therapy to something administered before the disease even takes hold?
Yes. If we have the technology to map a cellular fingerprint and train the immune system to destroy it with such precision, could this personalized mRNA blueprint eventually be applied to precancerous cells?
Oh, wow.
Imagine a patient with a known high genetic risk, or a patient whose cells are just beginning to show the earliest signs of molecular abnormality.
Yeah.
Could we eventually sequence those early warning signs, create a bespoke vaccine, and effectively vaccinate people against their own future cancers before a tumor even fully forms?
Vaccinating against a cancer that doesn't even exist yet, simply based on the cellular warning signs and genetic probability. That is a wild and incredibly hopeful thought to leave on. The idea that we might eventually transition from fighting cancer to fundamentally preventing it from ever taking shape.
It's an incredible future to think about.
It really is. Well, that is all the time we have for today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible future of oncology.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Please make sure to subscribe and share the channel, What the Study Says, so we can keep bringing you the science and the data that is actively changing our world. Until next time.